Welcome back to the Nordic Pavilion. Can you hear me okay? Good, all thumbs up everywhere. Lovely. This morning we talked to, among others, 3 mayors. The mayors of Lahti, Stockholm and Oslo, about the importance of buildings. And now we are going to zoom in and focus on building materials. And it's only us two on stage. Victoria Burrows from the World Green Building Council, GBC.
That's right.
Okay, you have to keep all the abbreviations really to non-existent, because I'm just like, you have to talk to me like a golden retriever. Okay?
I can do
Yeah,
that.
good. I'm glad. But we've got more people than just Victoria. We've got via link Matti Kuitinen, and I think Matti can hear us. I hope so. Matti is architect and senior specialist at the Finnish Ministry of the Environment. He develops national policies for low carbon construction and circular economy and coordinates related actions between the Nordic countries. And we've got Christina Chong, Green City Specialist from the Global Green Growth Institute in Seoul, an organization which aims to promote strong, inclusive and sustainable economic growth in developing countries and emerging economies. Welcome to us all, but we've got one more speaker, and that's none other than the Finnish Minister of Environment and Climate Change, Krista Mikkonen, to send us on our way. Can Minister Mikkonen hear us? You can. Welcome. We'll put on our earphones so that we can hear you. But go ahead, please, and warm welcome.
Thank you. Dear climate activists in Glasgow and throughout the world. In the global battle against the climate crisis, new fronts are opened every year, every week, and every day. In buildings and construction, which is one of the key sectors in global climate agenda, focus has so far been on energy use and energy production. However, as new buildings are designed and constructed more energy efficient and to use renewable energy, the role of building materials is becoming more and more important in our policy actions. Indeed, more than half of the life cycle climate impact of new buildings today can be estimated to derive from building materials, and the share is increasing all the time. Furthermore, building materials and products have a significant impact also on many other environment burdens: use of natural resources, eutrophication, acidification, waste production, and even declining biodiversity. Nordic countries have set high national climate targets. They have also taken serious policy actions towards carbon neutral built environment. In the past few years, Nordic countries have become forerunners in low carbon building. For example, in Finland, we are at the moment revising our planning and building legislation, and one of the key elements in the new legislation is a demand for low carbon construction. In fulfilling that demand, construction materials play a crucial role. Other Nordic countries are taking same kind of steps in their building legislation. That is why it is natural that we have also started a close cooperation to harmonize our green building policies among Nordic countries. One good example of that are the databases Finland and Sweden have developed together to form a basis for life cycle carbon calculations. Nordic Council of Ministers has had an active role in promoting Nordic harmonization. In doing so, it has also pursued a more competitive Nordic green building industry in Europe and globally. In the fast-growing green building market, Nordic countries are still small players, but together they can form a much more influential entity compared to their size. Dear friends, circular economy provides a holistic solution to environmental problems, including climate crisis. In the built environment, circular principles provide opportunities to actions across all building life cycle phases. Building materials play an essential role in pursuing circular future. It is extremely important that we Western economies, like Nordic countries, bear our national responsibilities in solving climate crisis. It has, however, become evident that much has to be done also in emerging economies and least developed countries, where population is rapidly growing and urbanization increasing. Sharing the same atmosphere, it should be crystal clear that our responsibility here in the North should be extended also to global South. Finland has been leading 6 years sustainable buildings and construction program under United Nations 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production. In SPC program focus has been on circular economy and responsibly sourced materials in the global South. Our experiences in SPC program show that solutions to mitigate climate change and to promote circular economy should always be based on local conditions and culture. We have also learned that whatever we build, building materials are an essential part of the climate challenge and also part of the solution. Dear friends, I hope this event will raise understanding and awareness of materials' role in global climate agenda and bridge gaps between Nordic countries and global South. I wish you a fruitful panel discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Mikkonen. Can you stay on the screen for a while and I can just pop you a question? Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes, great, superb. I like your title, Minister. What is your full title? Sorry.
The Minister of Environment and Climate Change.
And climate change. When was that added to the business card?
It was when I started, and I have noticed that actually many environmental ministers have this role to be the climate ministers as well, and that's very good because, as we know, the question of the climate crisis is just not an environmental question, it's the question of all other sectors as well.
Yeah.
And we also need a good cooperation between the ministers, not only the environment ministers, but all the ministers in the government.
Exactly. And talking about cooperation, how does the cooperation between the Nordic countries work? How is that going?
It's going well. Actually, just today we had a ministerial meeting with the Nordic ministers, and many of them have now also the role as a climate ministers. But also in today's discussion, we underlined that we need all the ministers and all the sectors are important, and there need to be good cooperation inside the governments. But we as the Nordic ministers, we really have a fruitful cooperation, and we want to be stronger in the global arena together as well.
Couldn't one imagine that the Nordic region has one climate agenda, just for the whole region, instead of 5 different agendas?
Well, that was the one question we were discussing today as well, that we could have our common shared target, but also inside the Nordic countries, so among the Nordic countries, we have very different kind of history and solutions. If you look at, for example, the energy sector, but still there are a lot of common, and we should more share our lessons learned when we are doing the climate action. And actually, a few years ago in 2019, the Nordic Prime Ministers signed together the climate initiative with the climate target. So we are doing a lot of cooperation, even though we don't yet have the common climate policy.
Okay, do you think it will come?
I hope so. I mean, even though some of the Nordic countries are not members of the EU, like in EU we have the common climate policy, but also those countries which are not members, like Iceland and Norway, they are following the EU's climate policy. So in that sense, we have a lot of common climate policy today as well.
And one final question, just between you and me, who's best in the class?
Well, that's the question we were discussing as well, because it seems that when we are in our own countries, the people are saying that you need to do more and you are not good at all. But then when we look at the neighbors, we are saying that they are doing so much better. But you know, nobody is a prophet in its own country, even though the neighbors are really saying that they are doing better than we are.
That's a very diplomatic answer. Yeah. Thank you very much, Minister Krista Mikkonen. Thank you from Helsinki. Let's see if you can get the other two speakers up on the screen. Is that a possibility, do you think? Yes, it's on its way, I think, was the meaning of that sign that I got there. Victoria, comments on what she said? Please step forward so we stand more here.
I suppose I can be a bit less modest than Minister Mikkonen. We position Finland as a global leader, not just within the Nordics. Absolutely. The work that they are doing with addressing whole life carbon through their regulations is absolutely world class in terms of, you know, by comparison, national level regulations that are happening around the world. There's lots of actions happening at city level, but in terms of national governments addressing and embracing whole life carbon through their regulations, then we would absolutely position Finland as a leader in that space. In fact, Minister Mikkonen is an ambassador for our Building Life program, which is working on bringing those policies to different countries across Europe, working with governments and industry to understand exactly what's needed from a regulation perspective to drive some of these changes through the market.
Okay. And what about the other Nordic countries?
Yeah, equally also involved in some degree. And again, very ambitious in terms of their policies. Oslo, city of Oslo, is one of the first cities to sign up to C40's Clean Construction Declaration, which actually looks at public procurement and reducing embodied emissions from the city's own public procurement projects, their sort of infrastructure and their own buildings as well. So in terms of leading by example, absolutely, there's huge, you know, I speak at events all over the world, and we always use the Nordics as the best opportunities. Sometimes it's sort of, it's easy to say that, you know, it's easy to achieve a sort of zero emissions built environment because they're blessed with low carbon energy systems, right?
That's right.
So in terms of, if you're thinking about operational carbon, then it's sort of, you know, it's a fairly straightforward challenge in terms of how buildings function. So that means that their priorities are improving how existing buildings perform, the energy efficiency, improving the existing building stock and renovating those, and also addressing embodied carbon emissions, because proportionately the embodied emissions are so much higher thanks to their energy strategy. So that's why, in terms of addressing whole life carbon, you know, they're leaps and bounds ahead of other countries. So
superb, superb. Do you say the same thing when you go to the Pakistani venue?
Possibly say.
No. Christina Chong, you're online. Can you hear us okay? I don't think we can hear you. No sound coming from you, unfortunately. Can't hear you. Let's see if, now I think I could hear you.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, there you are. Hello.
Great.
Superb. And we've got Matti Kuitinen as well. Coming up, maybe.
Yes, here I am.
I can hear you, but I can't see you. But They're working on it. In 2 minutes' time, you'll be on the screen. Christina, couldn't you tell us a bit about what you do?
I could. So I have prepared a very brief slide deck. Can I share my screen?
Yeah. See if the technicians are able to share Christina's screen. Thank you. And you're in Seoul. So it's
I am in Seoul.
modern technology.
That's right.
Fantastic.
Okay, so I hope the slide is showing.
Not yet, but yep, there it is.
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to share a little bit about the Global Green Growth Institute and our work on green buildings. So today I'm going to be very brief. So very quickly, an introduction of GGGI, as we are also known as. We are headquartered in Seoul in Korea, and currently we have 41 member countries. We have country operations in 30 different countries, and in these countries, we work with the government. Our colleagues are generally embedded within ministries, and we work closely with the government to support them in different sectors of green growth development. So my area, of course, is on green buildings. Okay, so this is a very, very rough overview of the work that we have recently been engaged in. And you will see that at the bottom, we have the GGGI value chain, which is describes our work across different sectors. And we generally work on diagnosis of problems towards assessments of different areas to different options for development, and we support government in policy analysis, policy development, and then eventually to design projects and to mobilize investments for the implementation. So on the top of the dotted line, you will see our work that is funded by our core funds, and below the dotted line, with a very heavy emphasis towards the right side of our value chain, these are donor-funded projects. So generally, we work on supporting our member countries towards more energy efficient buildings, towards developing green building codes. And in more recent times, we have been focusing a lot more on green affordable housing, as well as industrial buildings. So of course, in promoting energy efficiency, as Victoria was saying, we try to bring down the operational energy. And then increasingly, though, we also have to focus on materials and embodied carbon, because that all now goes into the assessment of how green a building is. And so for today, I want to speak a little bit about this study that was very, very recently completed. And this study is part of a larger research. You will hear a lot more about it later, but this is a co-financed project by the Ministry of Environment in Finland and GGGI's core funds. And of course, this research looks at many regions, and GGGI's focus was on Africa. So I will not talk too much about the research, just to give you a snapshot that we looked at the contextual situation unique to Africa. And for the study, we did a deep dive in 4 countries where we had country presence. We spoke a lot to stakeholders in Rwanda and Uganda in East Africa, and Senegal, Burkina Faso in West Africa. In total, we held over 80 stakeholder interviews, and well, in person where it was possible, but because this study was conducted this year, so in some places we were constrained by COVID-19 restrictions. But with the stakeholder interviews, our research team found so many case studies of innovations in circularity. So we saw material innovations, but we also saw process innovations promoting circularity in the built environment in many different ways, and with potential for replication across different countries in Africa. So in the end, we had to distill all these good practices down to 19 case studies to be featured in the report. And then the final component, of course, is an online SDG survey that was shared with stakeholders or partners from around the world. of the over 100 responses, 41 were from Africa. So you will see in the graph that showed the prioritization of SDGs to circularity in built environment, that there is very high consistency between responses from Africa and the responses globally. So I think in general, we see a lot of consistency in the responses through the survey, and it gives us a lot of confidence in the results that we're getting. So I will stop here, and you will hear a lot more about we will discuss the study a lot later.
Superb,
today.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Christina. Matti Kuitunen, there you are. You're sharing rooms with the minister, I see.
I am indeed. In the spirit of circular economy, sharing of spaces.
we hear you not so very well. So if the volume can be turned up, that would be lovely. You've prepared a little talk for us.
I indeed have prepared a little talk for you, and I hope that you can hear me better now. I'm going to share my screen. So today I'll be talking about the building materials and climate goals. And because this is a rather heavy topic, I think that we might go for a snack first. So let us take a look at the chocolate bar. And let's imagine in front of us a person who is interested in a healthy diet. I bet we all can imagine such a person, or maybe even we know such a person. So let's imagine that this person goes into a supermarket and wants to buy something that's delicious but healthy. So what would be the questions of that sort of person? Well, first of all, what does this product contain? What are the impacts if I'm eating it? And furthermore, is it ethically produced? And these very questions apply not only to food, but also to construction products. What do they contain? What are the impacts of producing and using such products? And are they ethically produced? Now, still talking about construction products, it's not something that is consumed in just a split second or a few minutes, as you would do in the case of a chocolate bar. If we look at the potential service life of say, steel structures, they are in our country over 100 years, well over 100 years. However, because of several functional and economic reasons, buildings are torn down in much shorter times. So the average demolition age for, say, steel frame buildings is below 40 years, which is a total waste of resources, especially if we compare these timeframes to the time that the emissions from the production of this steel bar or any other construction product remains in the atmosphere, which is way over 1,000 years. So the legacy of the product stays in the atmosphere, warming our planet, heating the planet long after the product itself has vanished. So this is something that we definitely need to change. And now if we take a look at the global available greenhouse gas emission budget or carbon quota, that's below 500 gigatons of CO2 if we want to prevent heating of the planet beyond 1.5 degrees. Now, comparing that to the estimated emissions just from the production of cement, steel, aluminum, and plastics, which are mostly used in construction, it's estimated that these emissions by 2050 would be over 900 gigatons, which is almost twice as much as we could emit if we wanted to meet the Paris Agreement's warming goals. So something has to be done urgently. Well, something that we could apply would be to use energy efficiency in industrial production, as well as decarbonized energy for the factories that are producing these goods. But even those actions, however important they are, can't push the emissions low enough. We would still be around 550 gigatons. So we would need to implement urgently radical measures of circular economy so that we could reach the highest tolerable quota, around 300 gigatons, because of course we need to have more than just cement, steel, aluminum, and plastic on the planet to consume. So for making this happen, we need to really think what is the consumption of construction materials. Nowadays, it's half of all annual use materials go into construction. Furthermore, we have the challenge of a rising population, we have the challenge of aging infrastructure that needs refurbishment and repair, and we have the risk of the rising sea levels. All these trends are driving construction needs even further. So I think that we would need to learn much from the nature, how the carbon balance is achieved in a beautiful natural forest, such as this example from our beautiful country, Finland. And we would need to copy this into the context of the built environment. We would need to put limits to carbon emissions and also set incentives for providing storages for carbon in the long-living products of the built environment. One thing to do this would, of course, be to give climate declarations for buildings, which is actually the process in the Nordic countries. Sweden is going to do that next year. Norway, Denmark, and Finland are following shortly thereafter. We are having a friendly race between the countries. So one of the questions in this race is that how do we compare different products? Is the steel bar better or worse than a wooden product? What about the greenhouse gas emissions? Well, luckily, we do have good ways of communicating this through environmental product declarations or through official databases that are providing us information that's reliable. And that's very important in the future, to get information that's reliable about the climate and environmental impacts of products. So in addition to this, it's important to start storing carbon. And of course, forests and natural ecosystems are the beautiful example of this. But an important question arises for the future. How can we also turn the built environment from being a problem to being a part of the solution? How can the built environment become a storage of carbon? So actually, I did a study with my colleagues from Germany, and we looked at all the possible ways of storing carbon into the built environment. And actually, we found quite many of them. Of course, we all know that bio-based materials and composites are very good for that, but maybe we haven't been thinking enough about the capacity of plants and vegetation to sequester carbon also in the urban context. Furthermore, the soils in our cities have quite a good potential for storing carbon into them as well, especially if enhanced with certain minerals to boost this capacity. Furthermore, we could utilize the age-old approach of biochar, such as in the Amazon forest area thousands of years ago, for storing carbon into soils or into products such as asphalt or cement, concrete. Then we have the carbonation of concrete-based products, and we even have some interesting novel solutions for capturing carbon dioxide directly from the air with the help of ventilation machines. And then we have some interesting and novel approaches in the lab scale, artificial photosynthesis. And if we can store carbon through these means, they could be used for carbon dioxide-based plastics in construction, and we could even use that carbon for curing concrete. So there are actually a lot of options, but which of these are mature enough? Which of these are readily available? So we ranked these in accordance to their maturity and applicability in the built environment. And we can see in the top right-hand corner that it's bio-based materials, biochar, that are the ones that we could immediately scale up. And then we have some approaches that are still in the stage of further development needs. All right, now we're talking about one of the so-called planetary boundaries, which is climate change, but we haven't touched the issue of biosphere integrity yet, which is actually far worse than the climate condition. So today, 90% of global biodiversity loss is caused by material extraction, according to UNEP. And as we compare this to the amount of material that goes to construction every year, there's no way of getting around that construction isn't such an important driver of biodiversity loss, unfortunately. And this is something that we would need to address as well. Furthermore, there is the social aspect. changing climate has caused the weather to behave in an unpredictable manner, which has led into floods or hurricanes or wildfires, which has led people to flee these events. We are seeing increasing waves of climate refugees. And interestingly, the way in which we are trying to help these individuals to rebuild their lives might actually be counterproductive for the climate mitigation. I mean that the ways that we are offering these people humanitarian shelters so that they could rebuild their lives can, in worst case, actually accelerate this vicious cycle. I made a calculation of 8 different shelter types that are typically used in humanitarian construction in different countries, from Sumatra to Peru and to Haiti and to Vietnam. And just comparing the greenhouse gas emissions from the production of these humanitarian shelters, which are built by tens of thousands, we can see that in the worst case, these would increase the per capita carbon footprint by over 6,000% per country, which of course makes no sense at all. So therefore, in order to address these and many other problems of the built environment, I'm suggesting a hierarchy for resource efficient construction, in which we would, as a first priority, build nothing, but just utilize existing spaces. Thereafter, slightly renovate them. And if that doesn't work, we could consider refurbishing old building frames for our purpose, and as a last resort, build new ones. So the first options would be utilizing and renovating existing spaces. And if we have to turn into refurbishing or building, then we should definitely prioritize renewable and recycled materials. So with these words, I hand it back to Glasgow and wait with great anticipation the forthcoming panel discussion. Thank you.
Victoria, comments to
Yes.
that?
I mean, yeah, absolutely wonderful. I mean, first of all, from the Global Green Growth Institute, fantastic to see those case studies that have been found. You know, we've been working on some reports ourselves at the moment, and one thing we're not short of is case studies, right, of people around the world taking these concepts on board and delivering them in a project level to really demonstrate what is possible beyond regulation. It helps to stimulate supply chains, the concepts such as Matti's been sharing there, and sort of brings them to the construction industry, and they sound a bit less scary when you can prove it in a building, right? But yeah, I mean, some of those numbers from Matti, I really like that hierarchy. We do need to address the fact that we have this massive growth projection from the global built environment. We're expecting to double our existing footprint of buildings that have been built since the beginning of time. We're expected to double that again in the next 40 years.
And most of it in developing countries,
in
right?
developing countries, exactly.
And Christina, are you still there online? Christina Chong?
Yes, I'm here.
Yeah,
Do you hear
great.
me?
I think you'll probably pop up on the screen as well pretty soon. What was your reaction to what Matti told us?
Yeah, I think what he says is very sobering and a very necessary kind of analysis. I think what our partner governments are very aware of is that, you know, there is no chance now to do things wrong. So there is, of course, a great need to build, and very, very high demand to meet the needs of a growing population, and also increasingly wealthy, we hope. But in any case, the need is there, right?
Yeah.
And but also the need to build right.
Yeah, exactly.
So right
and what if we don't build right?
Yeah,
I mean,
if we don't build right, then we end up with more unsafe, inadequate, and highly pollutive buildings. And these sometimes they don't last for a long time, and they don't serve their functions. They don't provide a safe and comfortable shelter.
No.
And then they end up damaging the environment.
And most of what will be built in the future is being built in the developing world, right? Is
Exactly.
the awareness there? Are the governments, are the businesses in the developing world, are they aware of the risks? Generalizing tremendously here. I'm asking you to generalize tremendously.
I want to qualify first that we are working only in places where we have been invited by the governments to set up office.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So that already speaks a lot. That speaks a lot as to the inclination of the governments. They do prioritize green growth. They do want to do the right thing. And so, so where we work, we find, yes, there is commitment, there is interest, there is awareness that things have to go right.
Okay, but we were talking earlier today with 3 mayors, and they were saying that they're actually quite slow in comparison to the businesses. The businesses are setting the agenda.
Well, I think it's the nature of the public versus the private sector. The public sector by nature is slow.
Okay.
And the private sector is innovative, it's nimble, and it's able to change course quickly. And if they see that there is one technology that works, they can just pursue it and refine it and improve it.
Okay.
So we found that there was a lot to learn from private sector and a lot to learn from development organizations in our research in Africa. But also, ultimately, to take things to scale, you need governments to be able to make the right policies, provide the right incentives, and to mainstream the good practices.
It's a chance to set an example.
Say that again?
It's a chance to set an example, right? It's a chance of a lifetime, really, right now.
It is, right? It's the chance that we have to get right.
Yeah, yeah. And Matti, when I listen to you, I'm thinking, why on earth should we even build?
To build or not to build?
That is the question. Is that Shakespeare? It is, right?
Yeah, I believe he wrote something similar. But of course, when you just look at the population trends, there will be 11 billion by the end of the century. So of course we need to have more healthy and safe homes for these people, more schools for the children to learn new things and that sort of thing. So there isn't just enough infrastructure on the planet to serve the growing population. So it is a necessity to build more, but how to do that without, really turning the planet towards an unpredictable climate catastrophe? That is a super good question. And I hope that there are smart brains in the audience and especially accountable leaders at the COP to really show the way forward.
How much of the world's materials did you say go into construction? Did you say 50%?
Yeah.
50% indeed.
That's right. That's correct, yeah. And, to Matti's point, to prioritize in carbon terms, therefore, to prioritize the renovation of existing buildings that have already gone through that first cycle of construction and therefore material use is the right thing to do. The challenge, right, Matti, is that it's easier to build new. It's harder to go into an existing building and identify what changes to make, how to reduce its consumption or to improve its, sort of extend its useful life. It's disruptive to the people living in there. It's sometimes in some countries it's more favourable in tax terms to build new, right, Matti, than carry out a renovation. It's actually taxed higher in the UK.
Okay.
So it's simply not the simplest thing to do in terms of practicality and the finances. However, in carbon terms, it's a no-brainer, and that's why it happens.
And you work at the ministry, Matti. I mean, are you trying to tell your minister that no, we're not building anything more? This is the end of building.
In the context of our country, where the population is decreasing or stagnant, so this is not so much a question of ours. However, we do have a great refurbishment depth, I would say.
Okay. What does that mean?
Needs to be done in an accountable manner. So that's sort of like our problem at the moment.
What does that mean, Matti? Refurbishment depth. What does that mean?
So yes, we have buildings that are becoming to the age where their technical systems or structural systems start to fail, and they are not very energy efficient. So this is something that most European countries are facing, and we are facing the same. So we are finding ways of doing this in a smart manner. We are trying to improve the energy efficiency while maintaining a good level of material efficiency. And we are hoping that circularity, circular economy would be the magic word here, so that we could really close material loops as much as possible in the context of the built environment.
I'm thinking that if that is the case, that 50% of all materials go into buildings, how come we're not having this discussion all the time? I mean, I've been moderating these things. I've been writing on architecture for 30 years. I don't think I've actually stumbled upon this question before.
Yeah, I mean, it's referred to as the elephant in the room, you know, especially from embodied carbon. We're only just starting to, as a sector, embrace the potential of a circular economy. The figures show that even on an operational basis, the building and construction sector is responsible for a huge amount of emissions, and so countries and cities simply won't be able to achieve their net zero targets without taking action on buildings and construction. You know, I've worked on construction sites and seen how wasteful they are, and again, that's driven by cost and budget and program. It's not driven by metrics around carbon. Projects are designed and determined on a financial budget. Every decision that's made is based on finance, and that needs to shift. We need to think about how we value our buildings in terms of carbon. If you set a carbon budget...
It's okay to base it on finance, right? It's okay, but it's the short-term or the long-term perspective.
Yeah. So if you add carbon into that equation, it gives you the long-term perspective.
Christina, any comments on this?
Yeah, I was waiting to jump into that.
Yeah.
So I think maybe Matti alluded to this a little bit in his comments about a carbon tax or some kind of a different forms of valuation of what goes into the finances of a building. Because even in cases in Africa, we find that indeed many of the construction companies tell us that it's cheaper for them to just tear down everything and rebuild, but also during construction, you know, for unused materials that are brand new and just in surplus, it's easier for them to just chuck it in the the landfill rather than to think about reuse or recycle or sharing that, you know. So it's actually very, very simple economics here, because we are not valuing the environmental services and we're not valuing the different components of our environment that are now becoming really strained. So we need to put a value on the environmental services to absorb this waste and to produce new materials so that the economics of construction can lead towards greener buildings.
Okay. I thought it was a really interesting example that you showed, Matti, with these shelters. It seemed to be a really simple equation. Bamboo, fantastic. Steel, not very fantastic. Better in Vietnam than in the other country, wherever it was. But, you know, we should build everything in bamboo. You're laughing, but honestly, or wood possibly then.
Yes, if it was so simple. I've been working actually in Haiti after the earthquake 10 years ago. And of course, the first thing I tried to do when we were rebuilding schools was to think that, hey, could we make this from bio-based materials? Well, it turns out that Haiti is clear-cut centuries ago or decades ago, and there is just no way of using sustainably sourced wood. And customs, because of super high rates of corruption and the logistical problems caused by the earthquake and tsunami, didn't work. So the only option was circular economy, and there we actually built the new schools from the rubble of the existing or the broken down schools. So in some parts of the world, there are not sustainably managed bio-based resources at hand. But this is not a problem that we couldn't overcome. This is something that we could rather easily solve, especially if the competition of the field area would be less fierce, if there would be a shift toward more plant-based diets. So things are so interconnected that sourcing bio-based materials is related to the available area of land for more sustainably managed bio-based materials and plant-based diet shifts. And furthermore, as United Nations have suggested, we should by 2030 reserve 30% of land and sea area as nature reservates. So that furthermore increases the competition on different forms of land use. So we really need to make the pieces of this puzzle fit together in a very, very delicate manner. But the thing is that we don't have time very much. So we would have to take those options that we know that are safe enough and proceed rapidly with those.
I don't want to dumb things down here, but it would be fantastic if we could just say, no, okay, first step would be to decide on building buildings in this material. That would be an immense improvement. Secondly, this.
Yeah, the challenge that Matti's just outlined there is that it varies so hugely country to country and even within countries, based on availability of materials. So once you've decided to build new, after you've gone through Matti's hierarchy there, the next option on which materials are actually going to depend on where that location is, right? You might have a hydrogen-powered steel production plant down the road, right? But you'd have to bring the bamboo from the other side of the world.
Yeah.
So Matti mentioned environmental product declarations.
Yeah.
They're certificates that are attached to materials that tell you how that material was produced, what the carbon intensity is, and it allows you to compare different material types when you're designing that building to get the best outcome for that project. And it's all about the data, right? And then that helps you inform those decisions. It's simply not as simple as saying always go down this material route or always go down that material route. What we need in addition to the use less, right, in terms of how the buildings are designed, is those heavy industries to also decarbonize their production processes so that they're as competitive in carbon terms, not just cost, with the bio-based products as well, so that we're not causing those sort of unintended consequences that Matti's referring to there.
How progressive is the construction industry? What do anybody feel up to answering that one? Yeah, Matti?
Yeah, well, my own humble experience is that there are lots of companies who are really ambitious and that are really sincerely trying to do so much better.
Yeah.
One example of that is zero carbon neutral steel, which is in the testing phase at the moment, and we are expecting to have it on the markets in the coming decade. So
could you repeat that, Matti? I didn't catch the name of the project. Sorry.
Yeah, I was talking about carbon neutral steel,
okay,
which is developed by a huge steel giant, SSAB, a Swedish-Finnish company.
Yes.
And that's just one of the examples of the radical circular economy in innovations that we need to have. But I think that's, as we look at the global population growth, the construction companies and product manufacturers, they just need to figure out ways of producing much more from so much less resources. So that is a thing where actually good design and new manufacturing technologies can really be handy. If we think about, let's say, 3D printing, which might not be the first thing to do in large scale construction, but for construction components, that might be a very viable option. There are examples of 3D printing complicated joints that have 70% less material without losing their structural capacity. Wow. So we must design smarter.
So there is still reason to go to architecture school.
I very much believe so.
Good. I'm so glad. So glad. What are your hopes for this meeting, COP26?
COP.
Christina, what would you hope comes out of this?
Well, I hope to see real commitments and real actions following from this. And from the building sector, I think what we want to see is really a commitment to reduce carbon through energy efficiency as a first necessary step, and then definitely through increase circularity in materials, in building use, extending the lifespan of useful buildings and materials. So I think there are many technical solutions out there, many case studies that have been highlighted, and we just need the commitment to replicate these and to support these, even if they don't make economic sense now.
But they will in the long run, you mean?
Exactly.
Matti?
Yeah, I have two wishes. First of all, faster phasing out of fossil fuels, for sure. And then secondly, faster uptake of new values.
Once again, a bit louder. I can't hear you. Faster?
Yes, so first of all, the faster phase out of fossil fuels, of course, and then secondly, a faster uptake of new values, because values are the things that make company directors or designers or individual buyers to make different choices, and we urgently need these value shifts.
Victoria, what do you say?
Well, I am here and I am hopeful because we do have next week Cities, Regions and Built Environment Day, right? It's in the official agenda. There'll be plenary sessions about the built environment. That is the first time that's happened since COP21 in 2015. In 2015, there were 53 nationally determined contributions from countries that mentioned buildings, and now there's 136 as of this year. So we are seeing progress. There are countries that don't have energy codes at all for new buildings, and just having energy codes, we all know, isn't enough. They need to be ambitious enough. To the points Christina was making, they need to step up in terms of genuinely reducing those emissions. So I'm seeing those trends. I'm hopeful that next week we're going to hear some great announcements and real commitment from those countries and cities and businesses on stage, because there is the willingness from the sector, and now we need to be delivering that on the ground.
Christina, final question. How many, in regards to what Victoria is saying, how many countries in the developing world have these green building schemes or, you know, a clear agenda?
Oh, many. I'm afraid I don't have the exact number for you.
Of course not, but just between
many of our member countries do not have them. We are working with several of them currently to develop green building codes with a focus on energy efficiency, but also, of course, on material carbon. So it's happening, but also the level of ambition of these codes is also important. So we want to start simple, start achievable, but definitely keep pressing on to improve the standards.
Thank you for that. And now we'll see if we can get Pekka Huvila on the line.
Very happy to join.
Yeah, great, Pekka. Welcome.
Thanks a lot. My intention is not to interrupt the nice discussion you have had there.
You're not interrupting at all, but you have a report to tell us about.
Couple of those. Minister Mikkonen said at the beginning that Finland has been leading this One Planet Sustainable Buildings Construction program since 6 years, and we have focused on circular built environment that Matti, I think, said is some sort of magic word that can save us. And we work globally. A year ago, we did a global report, and we had regional reports from Europe, North America, Oceania, Middle East, Asia, Africa, Latin America. And based on that, we have now made a bit of deep dive on how the things are going in Global South. And Christina mentioned they did 19 case studies, but altogether we have 42 case studies from more than 20 countries showing what is already going on in those countries. Quite often there's a misunderstanding, I'm afraid, that this circular built environment or circularity is some sort of technology issue coming from the Northern Hemisphere, but that is already happening, sometimes in the more like an informal sector, but also very good examples are done there. In addition to those case studies, we have looked at the policies, regulations that are in place or in the process of being developed in those countries. And in order to measure where we stand and where to go, how to set the objectives and how to assess the state, monitor the trends, we have been looking at the UN 2030 agenda Sustainable Development Goals and also indicators. And based on an international survey, 175 responses so far, they have been a bit validated in different regions. And the objective there is that the governments, the whole supply chain, even at the project level, you can pick up some measures how you can validate where you stand and where to go. And these reports will be out today. Of course, you don't read the links there, and I cannot share those in a chat box, but there will be some other way of sharing that information. So I very happily invite you to look a bit closer in detail where those countries or continents are going and which are the main challenges. Also, which are the opportunities, which are the business models, which are the new financial models, which are the new procurement models, and which are the skills needed in order to implement that. I stop here, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to open with more. I have also some slides if there are time, but if not, I'm happy to let's say, let the discussion go on.
Yes, I think we'll end there, but I've got a question for you. We in the Nordic region tend to see ourselves as front runners within this field, but what you're saying here is that we have things to learn from others.
I think there has been earlier maybe some tendency of thinking it's like North-South collaboration that will solve the problems. I'm more counting on South-South collaboration and also South-North. There are possibilities in exchanging information, what has been done, and they could be adapted. But still coming back to these materials and things, the solutions, I think, have to be always local. They are local climate, not only that, local cultures and availability of local materials. So a lot of indigenous techniques, vernacular buildings could be applied. They have been replaced by more industrial construction that may not be fitting so much. And in continents like Africa, as an example, there's still a lot of skills existing that could be exploited.
Thank you very much for that, Pekka Huvila. Thank you, Victoria Burrows. Superb to have you on stage, an expert helping us out. Christina Chong, Matti Kuitinen as well. Thank you so much, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You should be a TV presenter.